Hello and welcome to Moving Forward, where we discuss community affairs and meet local people with intriguing stories. I'm your host, Ellen Copy, and today we'll be discussing two seemingly different areas with one common goal. They both are aiming to better our future. Later this episode, we are talking about women rising in leadership with Norma Rist of Athena International. But first, we are with Dr. William Landis to talk about the rising medical research of cartilage and tissue. Thanks so much for being with us.
You're welcome.
Can you start by saying what a doctor, specifically in research, does?
So I'm a PhD, and I've been in medical research in the area of medical research for the better part of 30 years. So we study all aspects in my own particular area of orthopedics. But it's basic science. It just happens to be something that is clinically relevant.
Now, one of the things that you focus on is engineering in cartilage and tissue specifically. Can you tell us about that?
Well, the field of tissue engineering, as it's called, Ellen, is a relatively new field. It was developed in the middle 90s and is one of the most, I think, forward-looking of all areas of research at this point. Tissue engineering is an interdisciplinary science. It really requires someone with skills in biology, mathematics, chemistry, physics, and engineering. And the goal of tissue engineering is to try to construct living tissues in the laboratory that can then be brought to a hospital or a clinic for what's called translational application to a patient.
What about the difference between tissue and cartilage in all of this research? What are those two differences?
Well, not really. Cartilage is a tissue in the body, so it's really more appropriate, I think, simply to say cartilage tissue or simply cartilage. There is no difference. Cartilage is one of the tissues that make up the body.
Okay, so the research that you're working on specifically, how is it different, since you mentioned that it's newer, than other things that have gone on in the past?
Well, the field of tissue engineering is new, so basically everything that's developed on a daily basis probably is pushing, toward advancing the whole discipline of tissue engineering. So what we do is we have our own niche in tissue engineering. As I said, my background is in orthopedics, so we're very interested in what's called connective tissue. That includes cartilage, it includes bone, ligaments, and tendons.
You're saying the word orthopedic a lot. Can you explain that a little bit?
So orthopedics is part of medical practice and deals with the skeleton and the repair of the skeleton when things go wrong. So the pathology of the skeleton. So there are orthopedic surgeons, and we work with them very closely at Children's Hospital here in Akron, Summa Health Systems, and Akron General Medical Center. The orthopedic departments there, and their chairs and their fellows and their residents.
How does a professor and doctor doing the research work with those doctors that you have established the relationships with?
Well, that's a very interesting question. When I first started in this field, I was doing simply benchtop basic laboratory research. And it was designed and developed simply to answer questions about biology and pathology. But I gradually learned that it was a great advance and a great advantage to work with doctors who really knew what problems those of us in basic research should focus on to help patients. So this physician-clinician relationship with basic scientists is really critical to advance not this field alone, but almost any field in medicine.
Do you need to propose or how do you propose different ideas to them that you're working on?
So that's a two-way street, and that's really also very interesting. The physicians sometimes talk with us about a particular set of diseases, set of pathologies, intractable single examples of a difficult pathology, and we, the basic scientists, speak with them about what we think might be suitable approaches. On the other hand, we can suggest to them that we have certain, perhaps basic understanding of different kinds of biological reactions, and we ask them, would our understanding be suitable in trying to apply it to a pathology? So it's a real two-way street, and I'm very, very lucky in that in working with the orthopedic chairs and the fellows and residents in the departments that I mentioned in these local hospitals, we really do have a very, very good exchange of ideas.
It can be seen that that is definitely necessary. How does it usually turn out after you propose ideas and talk with them?
I think most times extraordinarily favorably. So just for an example, several years ago, I think Dr. Dennis Weiner, who's the chair of orthopedics at the Akron Children's Hospital, came to me with a problem and asked me about something that I had never heard before: slipped capital femoral epiphysis. It means, in layman's terms, that an individual suffers a crack, let's say, across a critical part of a long bone, the femur in the leg or the tibia in the leg. When that happens, the growth of that bone is interrupted. Oh, wow. Dr. Weiner was very interested in understanding whether or not the problem was a result of, say, weight of the individual, or whether it was some biochemical predisposition to, to the problem. As a result of his simply posing the question and getting us very interested in that particular pathology, we have engaged the research abilities and capabilities of several orthopedic fellows and residents and my own students in my laboratory. And as a result of that, over several years, we published some excellent papers that now have advanced the field and given us better knowledge and better understanding of slipped capital femoral epiphysis. It's just called a slip.
We're going to be taking a look at a story on more of this subject. But something that is interesting is polymers. Can you explain that word to us?
Well, a polymer is simply a structure that can be developed in the laboratory, consists basically of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and other atoms, can be added to with certain other atoms, and you make various things from polymers. I mean, our daily lives are filled with polymers.
We actually have a story to show that. Jason Miller from the Moving Forward team had a chance to visit the Polymer Science Center on campus here at the University of Akron. Let's take a look.
Believe it or not, we each are going to be growing our own replacement tissues.
When I discovered last summer in my research experiences that tissue engineering was really interesting and fascinating.
This is an area that is newly developing. We use polymers and polymer scaffolds to try to fabricate in the laboratory fingers, digits, small joints, possibly the longer bones of the body.
Right now in this laboratory, I'm working on tendon regeneration using polymer meshes for rotator cuff repair or Achilles tendon repair.
So this is a special polymer that is biodegradable, but we use it to seed cells, and the cells will grow into and around this polymer scaffold and will form tissue-engineered ear-shaped construct that can be placed onto a person. Polymers are going to be a very essential part of medicine in the future. They're a part of medicine now, but they're going to be burgeoning in terms of usage and application.
When we implant our materials, we put them into mice, and when we take the materials back out, you have an actual constructed body part.
This area of polymers, I think, poised to move not only the University of Akron forward, but also the country in terms of the realm of what tissue engineering promises.
Hello, I'm Ellen Copy, and we just watched a brief story about cartilage and tissue research. We've been speaking with Dr. William Landis, and as we saw in the package, you were mentioning that you think that engineering, tissue engineering is promising a lot for the future. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, yes, I can. And I actually think that tissue engineering is going to be what I usually call in my lectures the paradigm of medical education and medical treatment in the future. So what we do in the laboratory is we try to design and develop different tissues, such as this bone, which is a model of the femur in a human leg. and an ear, which we have here in this small container.
Yes.
So the object of tissue engineering is to take polymer scaffolds that are designed in the same shape as the tissue that they're intended to replace. Cells are seeded or deposited on these scaffolds and grown in the laboratory to a point where hopefully they can be translated to a patient. We can't do that very often, very frequently in the United States at the moment, but in the future what will happen, and it's being done in Finland and in a few other countries in the world right now, a given patient grows his own tissue with a polymer scaffold, his cells, in his own body for long periods of time, 6 months to a year. There's a surgery that extracts the scaffold with the cells, and it's implanted in that patient.
I read online about a patient who had done that. Can you mention anything about that?
There are several patients in Finland at the moment who are walking around living with various replacement parts in their head and neck. In Japan, there are some patients who have had tissue engineering of fingers, toes, noses, the orbital socket in the eye, and other parts of the body. We in the United States can do very little relative to these other countries, but recently we've had one experience with a young 5-year-old boy from the Children's Hospital, and in collaboration with the chair of plastic surgery, Dr. Ananth Murthy. This 5-year-old boy was born with a congenital defect, a birth defect, in which he had no ear. One ear was absent. So we can try to tissue engineer his ear, but not in the same manner that I was describing, where this young gentleman would grow his own ear and then have it replaced on the side of his head. In this case, Dr. Murthy took rib cartilage in a surgery from the child and fashioned an ear, overlaid it with the skin on the face of the boy. And this gentleman, as far as I know, this young man is doing quite well. But that's not so much tissue engineering.
And you know, with all of these different circumstances, what obstacles or controversies do you face with this research?
I don't think there are too many obstacles other than being able to fashion the tissues that we really are concerned with. There are hurdles and approvals and safety concerns that the Food and Drug Administration is very, very careful about. So in order for us to tissue engineer, you know, an ear or a leg or a finger in a patient here in the United States, we have to, as researchers or as surgeons or combinations of the two, we have to satisfy the Food and Drug Administration with many, many different hurdles before we can actually get to the patient. In the foreign countries I mentioned, there are the similar hurdles, but I don't think they're quite as rigorous.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. So far, moving forward, we have been talking to Dr. William Landis about cartilage and tissue research. But don't go anywhere because we have more for you coming up after the break.